27 missiles inbound, 3 minutes to impact. The warning wasn't a drill. Inside Fort Sentinel, hardened rangers, men who had stared death in the face, stood paralyzed by a storm no defense could stop. Panic clawed at the air, orders tangled, hope collapsed. Then, one voice, steady, defiant. "I'll fly the F-22. Every head snapped toward her. Captain Taylor Knox, a name whispered only in rumors, a ghost thought buried with a failed mission. Her eyes burned with something no radar could measure. Engines thundered, steel doors split open, the Raptor's silhouette cut against the fire-red sky. They said no pilot could survive a missile storm. She was about to prove them wrong. This is VeteranBiker. Comment 1 if you're new, 2 if you've been with us, 3 if you ride with us every week. Like, subscribe, and stay to the end. 27 missiles inbound, impact in 3 minutes. The warning didn't echo, it detonated. Inside Fort Sentinel, hardened rangers and officers who had marched through wars froze as the reality sank in. The radar screen bloomed with arcs of red, each streak a death sentence cutting across the sky. The command bunker shook with the sound of boots, alarms, and voices stumbling over each other. No one could find a plan fast enough. Air defenses weren't built for this saturation. Every second narrowed the gap between survival and annihilation. Colonel Rourke's jaw locked. "Scramble the interceptors! They won't make it!" someone shouted back. Even his iron tone cracked beneath the impossibility. Men who had faced fire with unflinching eyes now stared at one another, silent, as if waiting for the first impact to snuff them all out. And then, clarity cut through chaos. "I'll take the Raptor." The room snapped toward the voice. A figure stepped forward from the shadows of the hangar bay doors, helmet tucked beneath one arm, flight suit zipped and ready. Captain Taylor Knox. For a heartbeat, no one spoke. Her name had lived only in whispers, a ghost tucked away in rumor, marked by a vanished mission no one dared to mention aloud. Colonel Rourke's eyes narrowed. "You're not cleared for—" But Taylor was already moving. Her boots struck steel like hammers as she strode across the floor, the sound cutting sharper than alarms. She didn't argue. She didn't ask. She simply acted, as if the decision had been carved in stone long before this night. Engineers scattered aside while the hangar doors groaned upward. Outside, the sky burned a furious crimson with trails of incoming fire. The ground rumbled as though the earth itself feared what was racing toward it. Taylor climbed the ladder into the waiting F-22, fingers gliding over the cold metal as if greeting an old comrade. The cockpit canopy slid down, sealing her inside the machine that would decide life or death. From the control tower, disbelief poured through the comms. "She's insane. She's the only one moving. She can't beat that storm." Taylor's voice came steady, clipped, unshaken. "Tower, this is Phantom 17, rolling." The engines roared awake, a growl that rose to a scream, shaking the very walls. Flames licked the tarmac as the Raptor surged forward, pulling free of the earth with a power that silenced even the skeptics. Inside the command bunker, Rangers pressed to the glass, their hardened expressions carved with doubt and awe alike. They knew courage, they had lived beside it, fought under its banner, but this was something different. Taylor's jet clawed into the open sky, afterburners painting streaks of fire against the horizon. Ahead lay the impossible, a sky littered with incoming warheads, each one programmed to obliterate everything she was sworn to protect. Her breathing slowed. Hands wrapped the throttle and stick with a grip both gentle and unyielding. The heads-up display flickered alive, targeting markers dancing across her vision like ghosts. In the bunker, Colonel Rourke leaned over the comms panel, voice cutting hard. "Knox, you have no clearance!" Return to base immediately. The reply came low, calm, almost defiant. Too late for clearance. The first missile broke the cloud line, its warhead glinting like a falling sun. Others followed, a hailstorm of death descending. Taylor pushed the throttle, the Raptor leaping forward as though eager to meet them. The control room erupted, orders shouted, warnings blared, voices colliding into static. But in the cockpit, silence reigned. Taylor's focus narrowed until the world became vectors and velocity, heat signatures and contrails. She leaned into the stick, slicing through the air as her aircraft rolled into the storm. The first missile's proximity alert shrieked. Her hand flicked the countermeasures, flares streaking behind in a cascade of burning light. The missile lunged, chasing heat, and vanished in a blossom of fire. Cheers burst in the bunker, too early. Dozens more streaked toward her, weaving a lattice of destruction that no sane pilot would face. Taylor's jaw clenched. Her Raptor knifed left, then up, body pressed against the seat as the G-force slammed down. Sweat beaded across her brow, but her eyes remained locked forward, unblinking. One missile arced to her right, another swung low. She rolled inverted, dropping between their paths, letting the two collide in a thunderclap that lit the clouds from within. In the bunker, a ranger muttered, half in awe, half in dread, "She's turning their fire against itself." Taylor didn't hear. Her world was speed, steel, and the split-second margin between existence and erasure. Another missile screamed toward her. She pulled hard, engines shrieking as she spiraled skyward. Contrails corkscrewed across the heavens, a trail of defiance written in smoke and flame. Inside the cockpit, alarms blared, but Taylor's breathing stayed measured. In, out, in, out. She guided the jet with surgical precision, each move a gamble that demanded everything. Her headset crackled. "You can't survive this," one of the Rangers barked. Taylor's voice came back steady, iron under silk. "Watch me!" On the ground, the Rangers stood transfixed. Fear had locked their limbs minutes before. Now something else gripped them, an unwilling, reluctant hope. One missile closed fast, too fast. Taylor yanked the stick, forcing the jet into a dive so steep the horizon vanished. The missile followed and met the earth in a roar that split the landscape, dust and fire rolling skyward like a living beast. The shockwave rattled the jet, jolting her hard against the harness. Pain shot down her ribs, but her hands never left the controls. More warheads chased her. The sky itself seemed to burn. Taylor drove the Raptor into the storm, not away from it, carving paths between streaks of fire that should have been death. In the bunker, silence spread. No one breathed. Eyes followed every flicker of light on the radar screen, every impossible maneuver that defied both gravity and logic. A younger ranger whispered, almost prayer-like, "She's not flying through them, she's dancing with them." And still the storm raged. Taylor pulled back, the nose of the Raptor slicing upward through a gap barely wider than her wings. Missiles detonated above and below, shaking the air, yet her jet cut through untouched, a blade through chaos. The comms filled with disbelief. How is she still alive? She should have been gone 10 maneuvers ago, but Taylor's focus never wavered. The sky was her battlefield, the jet her weapon, and every second stolen from annihilation was another second for those on the ground to breathe. In the heat and the thunder, in the fire and the fear, Captain Taylor Knox had already crossed the line no one else dared to approach. And the Rangers, men who had once dismissed her as a ghost of failure, found themselves whispering one truth they could no longer deny: she might actually win this. The sky was no longer sky, it was a gauntlet. Taylor Knox had threaded her way through the opening barrage, but the reprieve lasted no more than a breath. The enemy adjusted. What had been a rain of independent warheads now shifted into something darker. A net. On her heads-up display, green icons multiplied, weaving into arcs that tightened like a noose. This wasn't random saturation anymore, it was choreography, a trap laid for one pilot. From the bunker below, the Rangers leaned closer to the glass. Radar traces showed the incoming formation bending unnaturally, changing course mid-flight. Voices broke across the comms. They're redirecting, recalibrating. They've locked on her signature. Taylor's jaw tightened. She pushed the throttle forward, and the Raptor surged, engines howling as she tried to claw altitude before the cage snapped shut. The first wave lunged in unison. Missiles came not just from ahead, but from both flanks, sweeping in at coordinated angles. She banked hard left, stomach pressing against the harness, metal frames screaming as the aircraft strained. The contrails etched across her canopy, white scars in the crimson dusk, before exploding behind her in a cascade of shock waves. In the control room, disbelief turned to fury. Colonel Rourke slammed a fist on the console. They're not just firing, they're hunting her. Taylor heard it. She ignored it. She couldn't afford distraction. Each second required a decision no simulator had ever prepared her for. A missile locked from below. She flipped the Raptor upside down, plunging toward the valley floor, the earth rushing at her like a black tide. At the last instant she leveled out, skimming so low the landing gear nearly grazed treetops. The pursuing missile couldn't match the dive. It plowed into the hillside, detonating in a rolling inferno that swallowed everything in its path. But there was no time to celebrate. Another lock screamed across her dashboard. Then another. Then three more. They were layering the strikes, forcing her to choose between impossible deaths. Taylor exhaled slowly, forcing clarity through the fog of adrenaline. Her mind mapped the sky not as fire and steel, but as geometry. Vectors, angles, escape windows no computer could calculate fast enough. She pulled vertical, straining against gravity, blood draining from her head. The jet clawed upward in a spiral, contrails twisting into a white helix. Missiles followed, arcing higher, until she cut the throttle and rolled inverted. Gravity seized her jet, hurling it downward past the onrushing warheads. Two collided above, bursting into a fireball that shook the stratosphere. Gasps broke out in the bunker. Some of the toughest men alive found themselves gripping their chairs, knuckles pale. No amount of training had prepared them to witness survival rewritten in real time. But the enemy was relentless. More launches streaked from the horizon, painting the sky with streaks of silver flame. Taylor could see them converging, an entire swarm designed to box her in. Her cockpit rattled with warnings, systems strained, electronics screamed, and still she kept her voice steady. Tower, Phantom 17 engaging pattern shift. The phrase meant nothing to most, but in one corner of the control room, a veteran major stiffened. His eyes narrowed at the code. He remembered old reports. Classified exercises where a pilot had devised insane maneuvers dismissed as suicidal. Those exercises had carried the same name, pattern shift. "Dear God," he muttered. "She's going to try it." Up above, Taylor's Raptor broke into a series of violent rolls, slicing laterally. Through the swarm in ways that made no aerodynamic sense to the untrained eye. She alternated throttle bursts with sudden engine cuts, tricking missiles into overshooting, slamming into one another in violent mid-air collisions. The sky lit in flashes, thunder rolling like a battlefield drumline. Still, one slipped through, It closed fast, a spear of fire closing on her 6. Taylor yanked hard, too hard, warning lights flaring as her airframe protested. The missile nearly kissed her tail fins before a countermeasure flare burst, luring it just enough to veer off. It tore past her canopy, so close she saw its metallic body streak, before vanishing in a furious blossom of light. In the bunker, the Rangers erupted, half shouted in disbelief. Others swore it was impossible, but every eye stayed locked on her. Taylor's breath rasped inside her helmet. Her chest ached from the strain, yet her grip never wavered. She wasn't flying the jet, she was becoming it, molding flesh and machine into a single defiant presence in the storm. But the assault didn't relent. The enemy had more to give. Suddenly, the radar painted an even greater threat. New signatures, not single missiles, but clustered salvos. She realized with a chill that they were deploying decoys, smaller projectiles, intended to confuse her systems, mask the true killers among them. Her cockpit became a flood of alarms. Targeting data scrambled, every blip screaming danger. She couldn't trust the tech. She had to trust herself. Taylor cut power again, letting the jet drop like a stone before kicking thrusters and snapping upward. Missiles surged past, fooled by the sudden stall. Others tracked, diving after her, but their angles conflicted, their paths tangling into self-destruction. One ranger in the bunker whispered, voice trembling with awe, "She's using them against each other, like they're her weapons, not theirs." Colonel Rourke said nothing. He watched, lips drawn tight, torn between fury that she had disobeyed, and awe at the fact that disobedience might be saving them all. Taylor's maneuvers dragged her dangerously close to the mountain ridges that ringed the base. Jagged cliffs rose on both sides, stone walls that left no margin for error. A single slip and she'd be nothing but fire on the rocks. And yet she dove into that canyonly. The missiles followed, crowding behind her like wolves on a lone hunter. The valley funneled them closer, closer, until her sudden climb forced them into each other. Fire rolled through the gorge, the blast echoing like cannon fire across the peaks. When she shot upward out of the smoke, her Raptor emerged, silhouetted against the blazing sky. In the bunker, silence followed. Even the alarms seemed hushed, as though the base itself was holding its breath. Then the radar flashed again. More launches. The enemy wasn't finished. Taylor steadied herself. Sweat streaked down her temple, soaking her collar, but her eyes burned with focus. Every second was a knife's edge. Every move the difference between obliteration and another heartbeat. Her voice returned to the comms, calm as if none of it had touched her. "Fort Sentinel, this isn't over. Lock down your systems. I'll clear you a path." The room erupted in disbelief. Clear them a path against this? But no one dared challenge her. Not after what they'd seen. Above the battlefield, the missiles twisted once more into an intricate pattern, arcs crossing, paths merging. They weren't random anymore. They were deliberate, coordinated, merciless. Taylor gripped the stick, her pulse matching the roar of engines. The net was closing again. Only this time there would be no escape unless she broke the pattern itself. And with a grim certainty, Captain Taylor Knox pushed her jet deeper into the storm. The storm had grown cunning. What began as brute saturation had twisted into a chess game, every move anticipating her next. Taylor Knox forced herself to breathe evenly, refusing to let the tightening grid dictate her rhythm. Panic was the trap. Calm was her weapon. Below, inside Fort Sentinel's command post, the atmosphere had shifted from sheer terror to a kind of suspended disbelief. Officers hunched over glowing screens, tracking the impossible dance overhead. Some clenched radios with white knuckles. Others murmured prayers they would never admit to later. Taylor didn't hear them. She heard only the roar of her engines, the rasp of her breath inside the helmet, the shrill cadence of proximity alarms. Her machine was battered, but still responded like a thoroughbred, lean, feral, and loyal only to a pilot willing to push beyond reason. Another cluster arced toward her from the east. Instead of dodging, she dove straight in, slicing through contrails, cutting power until her jet nearly stalled. Missiles screamed past, overshooting, colliding in midair with a blinding flash. The shockwave jolted her frame, but she steadied the stick, climbing again into the thinning smoke. In the bunker, a young ranger blurted out, "She's not escaping, she's baiting them." A silence followed, heavy and unnerving. Because he was right. Taylor's strategy was audacious. Make the enemy waste its arsenal by turning their precision into chaos. Every dive, every inverted roll, every throttle cut was calculated to draw their fury where it would do them harm. Yet she knew this couldn't last. Ammunition might not run dry, but stamina did. And her body was nearing its limits. Her vision blurred at the edges, G-forces grinding at her bones, but she anchored herself to a single truth. She could not falter now. Another alarm shrieked, this one deeper, darker, the kind of tone that meant more than danger. It meant inevitability. She glanced at the display and saw it. The next volley wasn't coming for her. It was aimed at the base. Her pulse slammed. They had shifted tactics. She wasn't the target anymore. Everyone below was. Without hesitation, she pivoted. Engines thundered as she hurled the Raptor into a dive, placing herself between the incoming barrage and Fort Sentinel. The move was suicide. Even the men watching from the ground understood it. Voices cracked over comms, shouting for her to break away, but Taylor ignored them. The missiles screamed closer. She fired chaff and flares, weaving a web of false signatures, then wrenched the jet sideways to cut across their path. 2 warheads chased the decoys and exploded harmlessly in the distance. One clipped a flare and detonated midair, shuddering her cockpit with concussion. But more was still coming. Taylor pulled a maneuver so sharp it bent physics into a knot. She rolled inverted, pulling her Raptor into the narrow pocket between the base and the approaching salvo. The crowd in the bunker saw it for what it was, a shield. She had made herself the barrier. The first warhead veered toward her, locked on the jet's heat. She snapped the stick left, dragged it right, then dived. It followed, only to collide with another in the frenzy. Fire bloomed, staining the clouds red. The command center erupted, half in cheers, half in dread. She had saved them once, but the sky was still thick with death. Taylor gritted her teeth, sweat burning her eyes. Her display warned of overheating systems, of structural stress no maintenance crew would ever sign off on. She ignored every warning. The machine would endure because she demanded it. Another lock. She kicked thrusters, jolting into a vertical climb. Missiles traced her path, climbing after her, hungry, relentless. She let them chase her higher and higher until thin air clawed at the canopy. Then she cut power. The jet dropped like a stone. Missiles overshot, too fast to correct, and vanished into nothing. The Rangers below roared. Relief surged like an electric current. Even Colonel Rourke's stone-carved face cracked in disbelief. But the major from earlier, the one who recognized the maneuver names, leaned closer to the screen, eyes narrowing. He saw something no one else noticed. The identifier stenciled on her fuselage. Phantom 17. His voice dropped into the silence. "She's not supposed to be alive." Heads turned. Questions filled the air, but his stare never left the display. He remembered the files, classified, sealed, never spoken of outside locked rooms. Phantom 17 had belonged to a pilot erased after an operation gone wrong, blamed for losses too severe to forgive. Taylor Knox. The realization spread like wildfire. Some muttered curses, others gaped, but none dared voice the thought loud enough. Was the woman saving them the same one who had once been branded a liability? Taylor knew what they saw. She knew what the call sign painted across her fuselage meant. But she didn't care. Legends and rumors were luxuries. Right now, all that mattered was survival. Alarms flared again. New signatures, larger this time. The enemy wasn't finished. They were sending heavy ordnance, warheads built to crack hardened targets. One hit on the base and the Rangers would be nothing but ash. Her heart hammered, but her voice through the comm was steady as bedrock. "Sentinel, stay locked down. This fight is mine." The room froze at her words. Not arrogance, not madness, certainty. Taylor banked sharply, heading straight for the fresh swarm, the air lit with fire, contrails weaving into a lattice of annihilation. Yet her jet cut through it with predatory grace, weaving, diving, climbing, forcing. Missiles into one another in explosive collisions that thundered across the sky. Every move was a gamble. Every turn risked tearing her apart, and still she pressed forward. The base shook from the echoes above. Rangers clutched helmets, unable to look away. Some still doubted, some still muttered her name like a curse. But many now whispered it differently, like a prayer. Taylor felt none of it. She felt only the stick beneath her palm, the tremor of the machine around her, the certainty that there was no turning back. Not for her. Not ever. The next volley split, half tracked her, half streaked toward the ground. She reacted instantly, rolling into a dive that brought her underneath them, cutting upward into their path. The collision was catastrophic, sky splitting with flame as multiple warheads tore each other apart. Shrapnel rattled across her canopy. A crack spider-webbed in the glass. Her breath hitched, but she didn't break. She steadied, adjusted, drove forward again. Inside the bunker, the Major spoke again, low but audible. "She's doing this because she has to, because she can't let this base fall. Not after last time. Last time." The words landed heavier than the missiles. Every Ranger turned to him. He said no more, but they understood. And above them, the woman they thought lost to history carried on, dragging her scarred Raptor into the teeth of the storm, her name burning through smoke and disbelief alike. Taylor Knox, Phantom 17. The battle wasn't over, it was only beginning. Part 4. The horizon pulsed with flame. Columns of smoke coiled upward, where missiles had torn themselves apart under her relentless maneuvers. Yet the air still trembled with the rumble of engines and the shriek of new threats closing in. Taylor Knox steadied her breathing, the hiss of oxygen filling her helmet. Her body was battered from the strain, yet her focus carved through fatigue like steel through mist. She guided the Raptor across the sky as though every inch of atmosphere belonged to her, daring the next wave to challenge her resolve. In Fort Sentinel's command center, the men and women watching no longer barked frantic orders. They stood transfixed, unable to look away. The battlefield above was no longer chaos. It was a duel. One pilot against a machine of war designed to crush armies, and she was winning. A burst of chatter broke across the comms, new launch signatures, multiple silos activating. The words turned stomachs cold. The first waves had been overwhelming, this was worse. The enemy had held reserves in the ground, waiting until fatigue set in. Taylor caught the new markers flicker across her display. They spread like a fan, cutting across the sky in a latticework meant to box her in. She pressed the stick forward, driving the jet into a dive that rattled. Her bones then pulled hard upward, slicing through the narrowing gap. Trails of fire streaked past her canopy, one missed by less than a breath. The bunker erupted in disbelief again, but inside the cockpit, Taylor said nothing. Her silence was a weapon. She trusted movement, not words. The enemy adjusted, linking their salvos into patterns that spiraled around her path. She recognized the tactic. They were trying to corral her toward kill zones. She answered not with retreat, but aggression. She pushed throttle, surged straight into the funnel, and twisted the jet through angles that made radar scramble. Missiles collided behind her, trapped in their own geometry. Sweat blurred her eyes. She blinked it away, jaw clenched, and cut through the smoke. Then came the deeper tone in her headset, a lock she couldn't shake. Her countermeasures deployed, flares flaring bright, but the warhead kept coming. This one had adaptive tracking. It ignored the bait. Her knuckles whitened on the stick. She pulled into a climb, but the missile mirrored her perfectly. She cut left, right, dove. The shadow never left. In the control center, Colonel Rourke's lips parted, the words, "She can't dodge that," spilling out before he realized he'd spoken. Taylor exhaled, rolled inverted, and dropped. Gravity hurled her downward, missile chasing. At the last instant, she kicked thrusters, banking hard. The missile overshot by a fraction, skimming past her canopy before detonating ahead. The shockwave slammed into the Raptor like a giant's fist, pitching her sideways. The canopy cracked wider, glass fragments scattering inside. She fought the spin, body screaming in protest, until at last the nose leveled. Silence gripped the bunker. They had seen her die 100 times already, and still she remained. But the pressure didn't relent. More signatures lit her radar. Too many. They weren't throwing everything at her anymore. They were wearing her down, waiting for the mistake no human could avoid forever. Taylor's hand hovered over the weapons console. She had been reactive, dodging and deflecting, but she knew this couldn't last. Survival wasn't enough. It was time to strike. Her thumb hit the release. Bays opened beneath her wings. Missiles armed, targeting systems locked. She picked the densest cluster, the heart of the storm, and fired. Twin streaks tore through the sky, vanishing into the swarm. Explosions rippled, cascading into a chain reaction as several warheads ignited each other. For the first time, the air cleared. The command room erupted with shouts. Relief surged, but it didn't last. "Enemy batteries still active," a technician cried. "They're repositioning launchers in the ridge line." Taylor caught the movement on her sensors, mobile platforms rolling out from camouflaged shelters, preparing to unleash fresh volleys. She angled toward them without hesitation. The ground rose fast as she dove, mountains looming sharp. She threaded the valley like a needle through cloth, weaving past stone walls and jagged peaks. Tracers sparked from hidden emplacements, peppering the air. She rolled, climbed, dove again, every motion threading her through fire. Her HUD locked onto the first launcher. She released smart munitions. The impact lit the mountainside in a cascade of rubble and flame. She swung toward the next, repeating the strike, tearing through the ambush with ruthless precision. But the enemy was cunning. One launcher remained concealed until she was nearly on top of it. The missile streaked upward, point blank. She yanked the stick, but too late. The shockwave hit her wing, rattling the frame, throwing her into a roll that scraped her altitude dangerously low. Trees rushed past her canopy. For a breath, she was certain the earth would claim her, but she hauled the jet upward, engines howling, clawing back into the sky. In the bunker, jaws clenched. The tension was unbearable. One false move and all would end. Then, in the chaos of flames and echoes, her comms crackled with a voice she hadn't heard in years. "Phantom 17, I knew it was you." The voice froze her for an instant. It belonged to Major Kessler, the same officer now standing in the bunker, the man who had once signed the report that erased her from service. The channel filled with static, then his words again, lower, heavy, "You shouldn't be up there." "Not after what happened." Taylor didn't answer. Her eyes narrowed, hands steady on the stick. The past had weight, but the present demanded everything. Another volley fired from the ridgeline. She angled sharply, cutting through the storm, loosing her own missiles in reply. Fire consumed the enemy's last platform, smoke boiling into the sky. Her breathing came ragged now, muscles aching, yet she drove the jet higher, climbing into the thinning clouds. In the bunker, Kessler's face was pale. He turned toward the colonel. "If that's Knox, then the reports were wrong. Everything we thought we knew, wrong." Rourke didn't reply. His eyes stayed fixed on the radar, where one green dot still moved against a sea of red. Taylor's canopy reflected her own eyes back at her, fierce and unwavering. The ghost they had tried to bury had returned, not to explain, not to justify, to fight. And the battle above Fort Sentinel was far from finished. The mountains were still glowing where Taylor's strikes had torn the launchers apart. Smoke rose in black plumes, curling into the evening air like bruises across the horizon. For a fleeting moment, the battlefield seemed hushed, as if the sky itself had paused to catch breath. But quiet was never safety. Taylor's radar flickered, warning of movement beyond the ridgelines. The enemy wasn't finished. Fresh signatures crept onto her display, not from distant launchers, but from aircraft now lifting off hidden runways. Fighters, sleek, fast, built to finish what the missiles had failed to do. In the bunker, the realization hit like a blow. A technician stammered over the comms, their scrambling interceptors, multiple units airborne. Colonel Rourke's shoulders stiffened. His earlier fury had ebbed into grim silence, but even he knew what this meant. She had faced storms of warheads and somehow survived, but this was different. Dogfights demanded stamina she was already burning to the bone. Taylor's voice came back, level, unbroken. "Copy. I see them." On her canopy, tiny glimmers appeared, enemy jets climbing fast, their contrails carving white scars across the burning sky. They fanned into formation, disciplined, efficient. This wasn't brute force. This was trained opposition. Her grip tightened on the stick. She welcomed it. Missiles were machines, predictable, mathematical. Pilots were something else, unpredictable, determined, dangerous. The first enemy fighter, Dove, spitting tracers that streaked past her canopy. Taylor rolled, cutting away, then snapped back with a burst from her cannons. Her rounds tore into its fuselage, blooming fire across its wing. The jet spiraled down in a trail of smoke, but for every one she downed, two more pressed in. They came from above, from below, circling, trying to bleed her angles. She darted among them, weaving, climbing, diving, each maneuver pulling more from her body than the last. In Fort Sentinel, the Rangers stood shoulder to shoulder, eyes fixed on the displays. They had no way to help, no weapons to lend. All they could do was watch a single pilot defy numbers no doctrine had prepared them for. Major Kessler leaned against the console, his face carved with conflict. He had condemned this woman once, branded her a failure unfit for the uniform. Now she was carving survival with every impossible move. his lips pressed thin. "She was always more than the file said," he whispered, though no one asked him to speak. Taylor's jet jolted as rounds clipped her tail. Warning lights flared across her panel. She pulled into a sharp climb, forcing her pursuer to follow, then cut throttle, letting the enemy overshoot. In the heartbeat of advantage, she unleashed her guns. Sparks erupted, tearing through the rival craft until it broke apart midair. 2 down. But more came. Sweat dripped into her collar. Every muscle in her body screamed under the punishment. She pushed it down. Pain was irrelevant. Only the fight mattered. The next attacker swept in with a missile lock. Taylor broke into a barrel roll, countermeasures streaking out behind her. The missile veered, distracted, slamming into empty air. She seized the window, rolled back into position, and lanced another burst of fire across its cockpit. The jet disintegrated, tumbling end over end. In the bunker, disbelief gave way to something heavier. Respect. Even the skeptics, the ones who spat her name like a curse, now stared in awe. But respect wouldn't win the battle. More interceptors streaked into the zone, fresh reinforcements climbing high to set the trap. They tightened a circle around her, squeezing altitude and options until escape looked impossible. Taylor's breathing slowed. Her eyes narrowed, reading the pattern, the rhythm of their approach. They thought they were hunting. They didn't know she was already setting the bait. She dropped altitude deliberately, letting them close, forcing their formation tighter. In the bunker, it looked like collapse, like the pressure was finally breaking her. Then she cut across the circle, banking hard enough to nearly tear the wings from her jet. 2 enemy fighters clipped each other in their rush to adjust. One exploded instantly. The other spiraled down, broken beyond recovery. Gasps rattled through the bunker. She wasn't just flying, she was rewriting the rules. But the gamble carried cost. Her own aircraft groaned from the stress, alarms shrieking warnings she no longer had time to acknowledge. Her canopy shimmered with cracks. Her left console sparked from damage sustained earlier. She flew a machine on the edge of breaking. Still she pressed. The last 2 opponents dove in together, one from each side, a pincer, nowhere to go. Taylor gritted her teeth, rolled inverted, and dove straight between them. Their tracers shredded empty sky where she had been. She pulled up beneath them, flipped upright, and squeezed her trigger. Rounds carved across the belly of one fighter, tearing it apart in a violent eruption. The final enemy rolled hard, breaking away. Taylor swung onto its tail. They danced through the sky, predator and prey swapping roles by the second. It banked left, dove low, climbed again, desperate to shake her. She matched every move, relentless. Then she fired. The rounds found their mark. The jet burst into fire, falling in pieces across the ridgeline. The sky went still. Taylor steadied her breathing, scanning for new threats. The radar, for once, showed nothing immediate. Smoke curled across the horizon, broken aircraft littering the landscape below. In Fort Sentinel, silence reigned. The Rangers, hardened men who had expected to die this night, watched one green dot alone against the red standing unbroken. Colonel Rourke leaned against the console, his jaw tight. For the first time, he didn't bark orders. He didn't demand she return, he only watched. Major Kessler spoke, voice rough. She wasn't supposed to be here, but maybe she was the only one who could be. Taylor let the silence fill her cockpit, the hum of the engines steady beneath her hands. Her eyes burned, but not with fatigue, with certainty. The fight wasn't over. Somewhere out there, more hidden weapons waited, buried deeper, preparing their strike. She could feel it, and she would meet them head on. The wreckage of downed fighters still smoldered across the mountains, their debris glowing faintly like dying embers scattered in the wind. Yet Taylor Knox knew it wasn't victory, only an interval. A battlefield, this orchestrated, never left gaps by accident. Her radar swept across empty sky, quiet for the first time in hours. That silence unsettled her more than alarms. She adjusted her grip on the throttle, body sore from strain, but her mind sharp, listening for the enemy's next move. In the command post below, the Rangers waited with taut nerves. Monitors flickered, showing her lone signal moving steadily above the battlefield. Some dared to whisper hope. Others remained rigid, too seasoned to believe respite meant safety. The quiet shattered. New contacts bloomed on her display. Not swarms, not fighters, but something heavier. Their signatures pulsed with density, crawling from beneath the ridgelines, bunkered silos opening their throats. Ground batteries reactivating! A voice crackled from Fort Sentinel's tower. They're bringing up reserves. Taylor banked her Raptor sharply, eyes narrowing at the shifting terrain below. Camouflage peeled away as massive launchers revealed themselves, platforms rising from concealed pits in the earth. What the earlier volleys had concealed was now clear. This was the heart of the arsenal. She had no choice but to strike. Her fingers danced over the weapons console, targeting pods sweeping across coordinates. Missiles armed, bomb racks primed. She nosed the jet downward into an attack run, engines screaming as the valley walls surged closer. The first launcher spat fire. A surface-to-air missile leapt skyward, jagged trail curling behind. Taylor snapped her Raptor sideways, letting the warhead sail past. She fired back, her own missiles streaking true. The impact lit the ground in a concussive bloom. Earth heaving upward, metal torn to fragments. But for every target destroyed, another emerged. Silo doors cracked open, more columns of steel rising. They weren't just scattered emplacements, they were an entire buried regiment. In the bunker, disbelief rippled. We didn't even know they had this many, a ranger muttered, voice hollow. Taylor drove low across the terrain, weaving between bursts of tracer fire that clawed upward. Her jet bucked with turbulence, but she stayed locked on, unleashing bomb after bomb, ripping through the ridgelines with ruthless precision. Explosions blossomed in her wake, mountainsides collapsing into avalanches of fire and stone. The ground shook even inside Fort Sentinel, dust falling from the ceiling as each strike thundered across the valley. The Rangers braced themselves, staring at the monitors as one pilot dismantled an arsenal built to annihilate entire battalions. Still, the enemy's network adapted. Remaining batteries fired in coordination, lacing the air with intersecting lines of death. Taylor rolled sharply, threading gaps narrower than the width of her wings. Smoke curling around her canopy as near misses detonated close enough to sear paint. Her cockpit flashed another warning, structural strain mounting. The machine was enduring more than it was ever designed for. She ignored it, angling for the next silo. She dove, released ordnance, pulled hard into a climb as the ground below erupted in a blast that swallowed the hidden launcher. Fire clawed upward, brushing the tail of her jet as she escaped skyward. In the bunker, Colonel Rourke finally spoke, his voice low but cutting. "She's dismantling their entire strike network." Major Kessler's reply was grim. "And she's burning herself out to do it." Above, Taylor steadied her breathing, forcing her vision to focus through the black creeping at the edges. Fatigue gnawed at her, but the mission was absolute. She angled toward the next valley, sensors locking onto a deeper cavity in the earth. And then her radar shrieked. A colossal signature pulsed across the screen, larger than the rest, shielded beneath layers of rock, until now. As the mountain opened, she saw it, a massive silo, doors splitting to reveal a warhead unlike the others, heavier, deadlier, its ignition sequence already alive. Her pulse slammed. If that launched, Fort Sentinel was gone. She rolled the jet and dove, engines thundering, every ounce of speed wrung from the machine. Anti-air fire erupted, lacing the canyon with walls of tracers. Taylor twisted, snapped, cut her path between them with impossible angles. Sparks flashed across her canopy as shrapnel grazed the fuselage. Her targeting lock screamed ready. She fired. One missile, two, both streaked downward, only to vanish in sudden blossoms of intercept fire. The silo was shielded by defense turrets. Ordnance ineffective, she hissed. Inside the bunker, tension peaked. They saw it too, the massive warhead rising inch by inch from the mountain's belly. Taylor's mind raced. She had one option left, something no manual, no training syllabus would sanction. She shoved the throttle forward, climbing high above the valley. The jet trembled as altitude climbed, clouds thinning, sky darkening. She reached the apex and flipped inverted, her eyes locked on the silo below. And she dove. The Raptor became a spear, plummeting straight toward the cavernous mouth, engines howling, wings cutting through layers of smoke. Alarms shrieked. The silo's defenses fired, tracers slicing past, but her path never wavered. At the last instant, she loosed her remaining payload. The bombs dropped directly into the open silo, disappearing into its throat. Taylor yanked back, body crushed against the harness, the Raptor groaning in agony as it clawed upward. A second later, the mountain split open. The explosion roared like the earth itself had ruptured, a column of fire geysering into the sky. Shockwaves hammered her jet, tossing it like a leaf in a storm. The canopy rattled, systems flickered, but she held on, teeth gritted, dragging the wounded fighter back into control. From the bunker, the spectacle was apocalyptic. A plume of fire rose higher than the mountains, scattering stone and steel in molten fragments. The Rangers shielded their eyes from the brilliance even through reinforced glass. When the echoes faded, only silence remained. The massive warhead gone, the launch site obliterated. In the cockpit, Taylor steadied her breath, her vision blurred, every muscle screaming, but she lived. The jet, battered and scarred, still answered her hands. Static filled the comms, then Colonel Rourke's voice, hoarse. Phantom -17. Confirm status. Her reply came measured, defiant. Target neutralized. Base secure for now. The bunker exhaled as one, relief, awe, disbelief, all tangled together. But in the shadows of the command post, Major Kessler's gaze lingered on the radar. He knew the battle had revealed more than enemy tactics. It had exposed a truth buried for years. The ghost of Phantom 17 was not only real, she was unstoppable. And above the ruined mountains, Taylor Knox leveled her wings toward the horizon, ready for whatever storm awaited next. The mountain still smoldered where Taylor's last strike had torn open its hidden heart. Columns of blackened fire climbed into the fading sky, turning clouds the color of ash. For the first time since the alarms had begun, the battlefield seemed emptied of motion. No new arcs on the radar, no fresh salvos streaking from the horizon. But Taylor didn't relax. Still strapped into her battered Raptor, she knew silence in combat was rarely peace. It was prelude. Inside the command center, the Rangers lowered their voices. No one dared call the fight finished. The colonel's jaw was rigid, his eyes fixed on the screens. Major Kessler said nothing at all. His gaze burned into the lone green icon on the radar, that solitary mark carrying their survival. Taylor exhaled through her teeth, steadying herself. She could feel the jet's frame trembling with every adjustment, warning lights blinking across her panels. She had forced this machine far beyond safe limits, yet it still obeyed, as though sharing her refusal to break. Then the radar pulsed again. Not dozens of signatures, not a wave of fighters or missiles. One, singular. Its size made her chest tighten. This was no interceptor, no silo projectile. The signature was massive, heavy enough to register like a moving mountain. Her comms crackled with the tower's alarmed voice. Unknown contact, approaching fast, bearing west. It's airborne. Taylor's eyes narrowed. Through the thinning smoke, a shape materialized on the horizon, sleek, angular, immense. An enemy bomber, escorted by its own automated systems, climbing higher with deliberate menace. If it reached altitude, it could unleash devastation far greater than the barrage she'd already faced. "Sentinel," she said evenly, "I have visual." Her Raptor banked toward the target, engines coughing but still answering her command. She climbed through the haze, each adjustment a battle against inertia and strain. In the bunker, disbelief erupted. She can't take that on alone. Colonel Rourke's voice cut through. She's already alone. The bomber released its guardians, drone escorts, angular machines bristling with weapons, moving with cold precision. They swarmed outward, forming a living barrier around the Leviathan. Taylor gritted her teeth. Her jet shook as she dove into the formation. The first drone lunged, spitting lines of tracer fire. She rolled, sliced past it, and unleashed a burst from her cannons. Metal shredded in a fiery arc, raining fragments across the sky. Two more closed in. She ducked between them, countermeasures streaking out, dazzling sensors, long enough for her to climb and snap a missile off her rail. The shot struck true, ripping one drone apart. The other spun away, crippled, smoke trailing. But the bomber kept climbing, steady, implacable. Taylor's breath rasped. She hurled the Raptor into a dive, chasing speed, then pulled up hard beneath the giant silhouette. Alarms screamed from the stress, her ribs aching under the force. Her targeting system flickered, struggling to lock onto something so heavily shielded. The bomber's belly opened. Her pulse slammed. It was preparing to release payloads, warheads that could flatten everything Fort Sentinel guarded. She fired. 2 missiles streaked upward. They slammed into the bomber's defenses, bursts of flame licking across reinforced plating. The beast barely staggered. From the bunker, one ranger swore aloud. "It's armored. She can't break through." Taylor clenched the stick, rolled beneath a hail of return fire, and angled for another pass. The drones regrouped, swooping to intercept. She twisted, forcing them to overshoot, then banked through the debris of her own kills to line up again. Her ammo was dwindling. Systems faltered. Every strike needed to count. She cut across the bomber's flank, releasing her last pair of short-range missiles. They streaked true, hammering into its wing assembly. Smoke and fire blossomed from the impact, one massive engine sputtering. The bomber lurched, its climb faltering. In the command post, cheers broke loose. For a heartbeat, hope surged. Then the bomber steadied. Its other engines roared, forcing the behemoth forward. From its belly, doors yawned open once more. Taylor's HUD screamed multiple launches. She saw them, payloads dropping, streaking toward Fort Sentinel. Her chest tightened. She had seconds. She dove after them, throttling the Raptor into a punishing descent. Wind tore at the frame. alarms shrieking as she plummeted after the falling ordnance. Her eyes locked on the nearest bomb, her jet screaming in protest. She fired her cannons, rounds stitching across its casing. It detonated mid-air, shockwave rattling her to the core, but more tumbled earthward. "Sentinel," she barked. "Brace for impact!" She pulled alongside another warhead, squeezed the trigger, shredding it into a ball of flame. The explosion rocked her sideways, canopy rattling. Still more fell. Her vision narrowed. Pain surged in her chest, her limbs heavy as lead, but she refused to let go. She dragged her jet into another dive, lining up the final payload. Her cannons barked, fire tearing into steel. The warhead burst apart, fragments scattering harmlessly before they could reach the ground. The sky burned with overlapping fireballs. Taylor pulled upward, lungs searing, muscles numb. The bomber loomed above still, wounded but alive, preparing another cycle. She had nothing left in her bays, no missiles, her ammunition almost dry. In the bunker, dread returned. She can't stop another release, she's out of weapons. But Taylor's eyes hardened. Her voice over the comms was steady, deliberate. "Then I'll do it another way." She angled her battered Raptor skyward, engines roaring with the last of their strength, and drove straight for the bomber's core. The control center went silent. Every ranger froze, realizing her intent. She wasn't planning another strike. She was preparing to ram. "Knox, break off!" Rourke's voice cracked, the first crack in his iron facade. "That's an order!" Taylor said nothing. Her focus narrowed on the wounded giant ahead. Smoke trailed from its crippled engine, fire licking its flank. It could be killed, but only at terrible cost. Inside her cockpit, she touched the console as if steadying an old companion. Her lips parted just enough for a whisper no one else heard. "Not today." She adjusted course, angling for the weak point in its wing route, the one section torn by her earlier missiles. The bomber loomed larger, filling her canopy. In Fort Sentinel, the bunker fell utterly still. Hearts pounded, throats dry, eyes fixed on the screen. The Raptor surged higher, faster, flames pouring from its engines. The two machines, predator and prey, rushed toward collision. The sky was about to decide. Part 8. The bomber loomed like a fortress suspended in the sky, its black silhouette blotting out the horizon as Taylor Knox's Raptor hurtled toward it. Every vibration of her cockpit, every warning flare across her console told her the same truth. Her machine was near collapse, yet her hands didn't falter. She had made the choice. Inside Fort Sentinel's command bunker, not a single ranger moved. All eyes locked on the main screen as the two aircraft closed distance. It felt as though time itself slowed, every heartbeat stretching into eternity. The bomber's gunners spat streams of fire, tracers searing the air. Taylor rolled the Raptor onto its side, cutting through the hail. Rounds clanged against her fuselage, sparks crawling across her canopy. She pushed the jet harder, aiming at the wounded section of its wing root where her missiles had torn metal open earlier. And then she pulled back. The Raptor roared past the bomber's flank instead of colliding. For a second, the bunker gasped in shock, certain she had lost her nerve. But Taylor had never intended suicide. She had chosen something far more dangerous. She flipped inverted above the bomber, skimming so close the turbulence rattled her frame. From this angle she could see into the machine's wounded structure, its plating buckled, its systems exposed. Her thumb squeezed the trigger. Her cannons tore a molten line across its vulnerable section, stitching fire into steel. The bomber groaned like a wounded beast, smoke vomiting from its mangled wing. It listed hard to the left, its climb faltering. The comms exploded with shouts from the bunker. Some cheered, some swore, but all watched in stunned disbelief as the massive machine staggered. Taylor banked away, climbing high for another pass. Her rounds were nearly gone, but she had one last strike in her. The bomber's engines thundered, trying desperately to regain control. Its escorts, the remaining drones, broke formation to shield it, spewing fire across the sky. Taylor darted between them, her movements sharper than their algorithms could predict. One drone clipped her wing with a burst of rounds, shaking her violently. But she spun into the hit, using the roll to line up another shot. Her cannons barked. The drone disintegrated. Only the bomber remained. Taylor drew a ragged breath, forcing her vision to steady. The cockpit stank of burnt wiring. Her canopy was laced with cracks, edges shimmering where sunlight caught them. Yet through it she stared unflinching at the target ahead. The bomber lurched, fire streaming from its crippled wing. It was losing altitude now, wobbling in a wide arc, but it still carried payloads. If it dropped even one more, the base below would be obliterated. Taylor pushed the throttle. The Raptor surged forward. Inside the bunker, Colonel Rourke's voice broke through the comms. "Knox, this is your last run. Make it count." She didn't answer. Her reply was action. The bomber filled her canopy. She dove under its belly, pulled vertical, and released her last burst of cannon fire into its exposed engine assembly. The rounds punctured deep, ripping into fuel lines. The effect was immediate. Flames erupted, racing along its spine. The giant machine shuddered, convulsed, then tore open as its internal systems ignited. Taylor banked away just as the bomber exploded. The blast lit the sky in a blinding inferno. The shockwave hammered her jet, tossing it sideways like a toy in a hurricane. She fought the spin, teeth gritted, muscles screaming, until at last the nose leveled and the wings steadied. Behind her, the bomber's carcass plummeted, disintegrating into burning fragments that rained across the mountains. The ground shook with impact after impact, thunder rolling for miles. For a long moment, Taylor said nothing. She simply guided the Raptor through the smoke, the wreckage falling away behind her. In the bunker, silence collapsed into eruption. Men who had been paralyzed by fear minutes before now shouted with raw relief, pounding tables, gripping one another's shoulders. Colonel Rourke didn't cheer. He only stared at the screen, his features set in granite, yet behind his hard gaze flickered something unspoken, respect. Major Kessler, standing at his side, whispered hoarsely, "She just stopped." The apocalypse with nothing but a scarred jet and her own will. Taylor's breathing rasped in her helmet. Her arms felt like lead. Her chest ached, and her machine was bleeding warnings across every panel. But she was still airborne. That alone was victory. Then her radar pinged again. A single icon pulsed on the screen. Different. Not a missile, not a drone, not a bomber. Something buried. Something hidden. A coded signal bled through her comms, one she recognized in her bones. Not enemy fire. A system she had once helped design. Her lips tightened. She knew instantly what it was. A failsafe, buried deep beneath the arsenal, meant to launch if everything else was destroyed. The true last strike. She had seen the protocols years ago, back when her name was still trusted in files that later condemned her. Only a handful of people knew those codes existed. Fewer still could decipher them. And now, she was the only one left in the sky. In the bunker, the technicians scrambled. "We're reading. We don't even know. Some kind of activation underground." Rourke's voice sharpened. "Knox, what is it?" Her reply was measured, steady. "It's their dead man's switch. They're trying to fire from beneath the ruins. Can you stop it?" She paused. "Yes, but only because I was there when they built it." The room fell silent. Every ranger turned toward the comms, the weight of her words crushing them. This was the twist none of them could have imagined. The woman they once branded as compromised was the one person alive who understood the enemy's hidden design. Taylor's eyes burned as she angled the Raptor back toward the mountains. "Patch me direct into their control frequency. I'll shut it down." The technicians hesitated. "You mean you still remember the codes? I wrote part of them." Her Raptor limped through the smoke, battered but unbroken, as she pulled up the old sequences from memory. Her fingers tapped across the console, overriding systems not meant to be touched mid-flight. Streams of code scrolled across her display, alien to anyone but her. Inside the bunker, all anyone could do was wait. The fate of their base, their lives, the war itself, rested in the mind of a woman they had nearly erased. Minutes stretched into eternity. Static filled the comms. Sweat dripped into Taylor's eyes, her jaw tight with concentration. Then the alarm tones softened one by one, until at last the radar cleared. The activation ceased. The hidden launch had been aborted. Taylor sagged back against her seat, chest heaving, exhaustion threatening to swallow her whole. But she forced her eyes open, guided the Raptor higher above the haze. The sky was open. For the first time since the nightmare began, no new threat rose to meet her. In Fort Sentinel, the bunker erupted again, louder this time. Relief surged, raw and unrestrained. Colonel Rourke's voice cut through, low but unyielding. "Phantom 17. You just saved us all." Taylor said nothing. She leveled her wings, guiding the scarred jet toward the base. Her canopy reflected her own eyes back, tired, burning, unbroken. The ghost of the past had become the shield of the present, and the Rangers, hardened men who once doubted her, now understood the truth. Taylor Knox wasn't just a pilot. She was the line between survival and annihilation. The storm was over. For now, the Raptor limped across the sky, its fuselage scorched, panels buckled, and sensors flashing with more warnings than Taylor Knox could register. Yet somehow, impossibly, it was still flying. Every groan of the battered frame felt like a heartbeat in her chest, a reminder that both she and the machine had refused to die. Below, Fort Sentinel stirred from its paralysis. Rangers poured from the bunker onto the windswept tarmac, their faces upturned, following the single dot carving across the smoke-drenched heavens. They had been trained to stand against any storm, but what they had witnessed tonight went beyond endurance. It was defiance incarnate. Taylor's voice crackled faintly over the comms. "Sentinel, field is clear. Returning to base." The colonel who had barked orders all night, who had doubted her very presence in the sky, remained silent. He stared through the bunker glass as though afraid that words might shatter the fragile miracle unfolding before him. The landing gear lowered with a reluctant groan. Sparks trailed as the wheels met steel. Taylor fought the controls all the way down, every movement demanding precision she no longer had strength to give. Yet the Raptor touched down, skidding, protesting, before sliding to a halt amid a haze of smoke. For a long breath no one moved. Then the canopy opened. Taylor pulled herself upright, helmet under one arm, her flight suit torn at the seams from the strain of G-forces. Her face was drawn, streaked with sweat, but her eyes blazed with an intensity that silenced the gathered soldiers. Rangers who had once whispered against her now stood frozen. Some felt shame for their doubts. Others simply stared, unable to reconcile rumor with the living proof before them. Colonel Rourke stepped forward, boots echoing across the tarmac. His jaw worked as though every word cost him more than battle. "You weren't supposed to be out there." Taylor met his gaze without flinching. Neither were those silos or that bomber, yet here we are. The silence after her words was deafening. Major Kessler broke it. His voice, once sharp with judgment, carried something different now. Phantom 17 was erased from the records. They said she disobeyed, that she abandoned her team. But the truth, his words caught. The truth is we never understood what she carried. Rourke's eyes flicked to him, then back to Taylor. "So which is it, Knox? Were the stories wrong?" Taylor inhaled slowly, scanning the faces around her. Men who had survived by her hand, men who still doubted, and men who would follow her now without question. "The reports were written by those who needed someone to blame," she said at last. "I took the fall because it kept others alive. That's all the truth that matters." Her words landed heavier than any explosion. The Rangers exchanged glances, realizing they had been fighting under shadows spun from lies. One younger soldier, barely more than a boy, still trembling from the night's chaos, stepped forward. His voice cracked, but it carried. "Ma'am, you just saved us all." Taylor's gaze softened, just for a breath. "No, we saved each other. I just happened to be the one holding the stick." Laughter didn't follow. Instead, an unfamiliar quiet fell. Respect, raw and unguarded. Yet celebration didn't last. A siren wailed across the base, lower than the missile alarms, a tone meant for something far rarer. A communications officer sprinted across the tarmac, headset in place, panic etched across his face. "Command transmission coming through, high priority." Rourke took the receiver, his expression darkening as he listened. Finally, he turned to the gathered Rangers, voice carrying the weight of iron. "The strike we just stopped, it wasn't isolated. Other bases are under threat. This was meant to cripple our entire defense line." The words cut like a blade. Relief curdled into dread. Taylor listened, her muscles aching but her mind already racing. If tonight had been only one piece, then the storm wasn't over. It was spreading. "Send me the coordinates," she said quietly. Rourke's head snapped toward her. "You're barely standing. Your jet is half ruined. You won't make another run." Taylor's jaw tightened. "You don't have another pilot who knows what I know." The colonel's silence said everything. She was right. Kessler stepped closer, voice low but urgent. "Let her go. The rest of us can't crack their systems. She can—" The colonel hesitated, torn between pride and necessity. Finally, he gave a short nod. Taylor turned back toward her scarred jet. The Raptor looked broken, its skin charred, its edges warped. Yet when she placed a hand on the fuselage, she felt only steadiness. Machine and pilot, both battered, both unyielding. The Rangers watched as ground crews scrambled, patching what they could in frantic minutes. Fuel lines sealed, hydraulics stabilized, ammunition resupplied in whatever measure remained. It wasn't perfection, it was survival. As she climbed the ladder back into the cockpit, a voice rose from the crowd. "Bring it home, Phantom!" It echoed, taken up by others, until the chant rolled across the runway. "Phantom, Phantom, Phantom." Taylor strapped in, sealing the canopy. Her voice came over the comms, firm as stone. "Fort Sentinel, Phantom 17 ready for redeploy." Engines thundered once more. The Raptor rolled forward, scarred but alive, lifting into the smoke-streaked dawn. Inside the command center, Kessler leaned against the console, watching her dot climb back onto the radar. "They called her a ghost," he murmured. "But ghosts don't fight like that." Rourke's eyes narrowed, his voice little more than gravel. "No, ghosts don't save the living. She just did." Up above, Taylor guided the Raptor toward the new coordinates. The horizon stretched endless and uncertain, but her focus remained absolute. She had been erased, condemned, forgotten. Tonight she had returned, not for glory, not for redemption, but for duty. The comms crackled again, urgent reports flooding in. Other bases under siege, missile storms rising across the theater. Taylor adjusted her course. There would be no rest. The war had shifted, and she was already its spear. She flexed her grip on the controls, exhaustion buried beneath purpose. Her reflection in the cracked canopy stared back, resolute. Captain Taylor Knox, Phantom -17, not a ghost, not a failure. A shield no enemy could bend, and as her Raptor cut into the new storm ahead, the world finally began to understand. The night over Fort Sentinel had ended in smoke, fire, and silence. What began as certain destruction had been turned into survival by one woman and the machine she refused to let fall. When the last echoes of the bomber's detonation faded into the mountains, the base stood in stunned quiet. Men who had been ready to die minutes before now found themselves alive, blinking at the impossible. Truth, a pilot they thought erased from history, had not only returned, but had become their shield. Captain Taylor Knox, Phantom 17. She had gone where no sane pilot would, threading through storms of fire meant to erase entire battalions. She had fought missiles with nothing but geometry and instinct, faced drones and interceptors with a machine, on the edge of collapse, and forced a bomber from the sky with the last scraps of ammunition in her arsenal. And when the enemy played their final card, the buried failsafe no one else could even identify, she had disarmed it because she had been there at the beginning. She had known the system's secrets, the kind no report ever admitted, the kind that lived only in the memories of those who carried them. In the aftermath, Fort Sentinel's tarmac was lined with faces that could no longer deny her. Rangers who had laughed at her name now stared in reverence. Officers who had questioned her right to be in the air now knew she was the reason they still drew breath. The colonel who had ordered her down in anger had watched her tear through every obstacle without faltering, and the major who once signed her condemnation had been forced to speak the truth. Records lied, but Taylor Knox did not. She did not explain herself. She did not ask for redemption. She had simply flown. The cost was written across her body, sweat streaking through grime, muscles bruised. From G-force strain, her voice hoarse from hours of command and silence. The cost was written across her jet, wings scarred, canopy fractured. Alarms still hissing warnings even as it cooled on the runway. Yet both stood. Phantom -17, once a call sign spoken only in rumor, was no longer a ghost. She was flesh, steel, and fire. She had become the edge between annihilation and survival. The Rangers began to murmur her name, first in whispers, then louder, until it rolled like a chant across the airfield. Phantom, phantom, phantom. It wasn't celebration, it was recognition. It was awe. It was the sound of men and women admitting that legends sometimes return not to haunt, but to save. But Taylor herself did not linger in that moment. She did not stand on podiums or raise her arms in triumph. Her eyes had already turned toward the horizon. The fight was not finished. Reports streamed in. Other bases under siege, other barrages falling. What she had stopped tonight had only been the first strike of something larger. She requested coordinates. She climbed back into the jet, and she rose again. That was who she was. She wasn't a ghost of failure. She wasn't a relic of an erased mission. She wasn't a pilot chasing glory. She was the line no enemy was meant to cross, the hand that steadied when everything else collapsed. She was duty personified. And as the Raptor's engines thundered into the night, scarred but alive, every ranger who watched knew the truth. The world would speak her name again. Not because she demanded it, but because history could not ignore what had happened here. Fort Sentinel had been marked for destruction. It had survived because of her. There would be debates in command halls. There would be reports rewritten, secrets dragged into daylight, accusations re-examined. Some would try to claim credit, others would whisper conspiracies, but none of it mattered. The rangers who had stood under that sky knew what they had seen. The colonel who had doubted her knew who had saved his command. The major, who had once buried her in paperwork, had seen her return and burn the lies away with fire and steel. The truth was undeniable. Phantom 17 had returned, and with her, the line between despair and hope had shifted forever. When she flew into the next horizon, she did not know how many more storms waited. She only knew that she would meet them. She had been tested in fire, and she had endured. That endurance would not fade. Every scar on her jet was a testament. Every crack in her canopy was a reminder. Every aching muscle was proof. She was not invincible. She was not immortal. She was simply a pilot who refused to yield. And sometimes that was enough to move mountains. The rangers at Fort Sentinel would carry that night for the rest of their lives. They would tell the story in barracks and in battlefields far from home. They would speak of the storm of fire, the sky that turned red, the bomber that loomed like a god of war, and the woman who carved through all of it alone. They would tell of her silence, how she spoke little but flew with answers louder than words. They would tell of her past, how whispers of betrayal had turned to revelations of sacrifice. They would tell of her presence, how she landed, scarred but upright, and looked at them not as doubters but as comrades. They would tell of the moment the chant began, and one day when others stood where they had stood, staring at horizons. Filled with fire, those who remembered would whisper, "Don't break, don't run, remember Phantom." Because sometimes survival is not a matter of numbers or weapons. Sometimes it is the refusal of one person to yield that shifts the weight of war. Taylor Knox had been erased, but the night the sky turned into a graveyard of missiles and bombers, she carved herself back into history. Not as a ghost, as a shield, as a storm breaker. As the pilot who dove straight into fire and proved the impossible could be done, and as her Raptor cut toward new coordinates, carrying her battered frame and her unbroken will, the world below whispered the truth that command could never bury again. Phantom 17 had returned, and she was not finished. This is VeteranBiker. If you felt the storm tonight, leave your voice below. Tell us where you watched, tell us why you ride with us, and tell us how stories like this strike you. Like, subscribe, and share so others hear what you heard, so others know that ghosts don't always vanish. Sometimes they come back to defend. Stay with us, because the storm isn't over, and neither is she.